Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
And it's a Thursday morning. It's September 18th, 2025. Great to be with you on EWTN's Catholic Connection today and every day, Monday through Friday. It's a feast of St. Joseph of Cupertino. It's a very interesting story about this saint that was born in the early 17th century in the Naples area of Italy, and actually is one of the patrons of exam takers and air travelers. And air travelers because he bilocated and often levitated. So there's a really cool blog that I did on Tease Italy, TravelItalyExpert.com. If you want to know more about this wonderful saint, St. Joseph of Cupertino, pray for us. Oh my goodness, the news keeps breaking. It is a very, very busy news morning, and we'll have a lot to share with you. But first, the rundown. Of course, we are going to have Father Mitch Pacwa on, and he will give us his perspective, his 2 cents, his cultural approach to what's happening with the continued fallout from the horrible shooting death last week of Charlie Kirk, a great pro-life leader and activist and conservative leader. And in particular, there are some new developments that have been happening. Yesterday, you may have heard the news that yet another talk show host has gone bye-bye. This time it was Jimmy Kimmel, who made some pretty awful comments about the death of Charlie Kirk. And several of the TV groups that operate affiliates within the ABC network, these are broadcast stations, told NBC, okay, basta, we are done. And ABC has now pulled him, and it says indefinitely. So a lot is happening, and of course many on the left are claiming it is the right-wing conspiracy extraordinaire, now the latest one, and that it's all about silencing their voices. Well, you know what? As with Stephen Colbert, the ratings were awful. His ratings apparently were worse than Colbert's, and he just wasn't appealing to people. And the networks are saying, those networks within ABC, those groups that operate a large amount of affiliates, are saying this is not meeting our needs. And I was really, really glad to see the FCC chair come out and say we have to get back to what is known as the public interest. This is something that goes way, way back to the formation of the FCC, and I wrote all about this in my book, Noise. And this is what you learn in journalism school and broadcasting school, at least what you used to learn, in terms of the responsibility that all media people have, but especially if you are a licensed broadcaster. Radio and TV stations are different than cable. There's different rules and regulations, okay? Not much for cable. It's still kind of the wild, wild west. But when it comes to broadcast stations, you have license requirements, and those licenses can be revoked if they feel that you're not living up to your job to meet the public interest needs and necessity. That means not just meeting the needs of people in one particular arena. And so this is what's happening. A lot of these groups are saying, you know what, it's costing us money. We can't get advertisers because the ratings are so bad. And, you know, bottom line is people don't like it. It's not some conspiracy. It's poor broadcasting is what's happening. And I think people are speaking up, yes, but I don't think that ABC is having a huge morality paradigm shift. Money is making them think a little bit differently about this. I'm hoping down the road they'll realize that it's not just people who are on the left side of things that are out there in the world. We'll see. And we'll get Father Mitch's perspective as well. And then talk about great timing in terms of something that is really needed and helpful now. We're going to be joined by our friends from Guadalupe Radio Network. Dave Palmer and Zach Allen are both general managers of Guadalupe Radio, an amazing network within our affiliates across the country. And they have this new program that I found out about through my friend Toya Hall, of course, who runs Guadalupe. She's awesome. And we were talking, and she was telling us about the GRN Academy. And then Dave Palmer and I, who go way back years and years in Catholic radio, he was telling me about it as well. This is so cool what they are doing. They're offering all kinds of great classes online having to do with the Catholic faith. So we're going to talk about that, how it's going, and apparently it's going really well. A lot of people have signed up already. So we will talk with Dave and Zach as well in the first hour of the program. I do hope you can stay tuned for the entire 2 hours, our second hour on EWTN's Radio Extra, of course. Weather-wise, we have heavy rain and flash flooding possible across portions of the Southwest through Friday, where flood watches are in effect. And we have strong to locally severe thunderstorms possible today across portions of the plains, We have a tropical wave causing some heavy rainfall in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, which may also cause urban and small stream flooding and landslides in those areas of those properties today. It is a Thursday. We appreciate your listenership here on EWTN right now. Ton of news, no surprise. So let's see what's happening in and around the world on EWTN on a Thursday morning. At the conclusion of his weekly general audience, the Holy Father expressing his deepest sympathies to the people of Gaza, renewing his appeal for a ceasefire, the release of hostages, a diplomatic solution to the crisis, and full respect for international humanitarian law. Israeli forces launching a massive new military offensive, Vatican News reports, against Gaza's largest population center, Gaza City, earlier this week, ordering civilians to flee the city amid the most intense bombardment they have faced in almost 2 years of war. Hamas saying 350,000 people have fled the eastern part of the city for displacement centers in other parts of Gaza City, while another 175,000 have fled the city altogether. FBI Director Kash Patel saying in a U.S. Senate hearing this week, as Catholic News Agency reports, that there have been terminations and resignations of employees related to a 2023 anti-Catholic memo produced by Richmond, Virginia's field office, and the agency has made policy adjustments. Patel making the comments during a hearing earlier this week in a line of questioning from Republican Senator Josh Hawley. He requested an update on the administration's investigation into the memo, asking about the FBI's efforts to combat anti-Catholic and anti-Christian violence and hate crimes.
Senator, we did dig in, and we are doing our investigation simultaneously with Congress. And just to put it in perspective, we've provided 700 documents on the Richmond Catholic memo specifically to this committee, whereas my predecessor provided 19 pages. And not only that, but we looked into how the source recruitment structure at the FBI was conducted during this time. And we made adjustments and permanent fixes to ensure that sources are not put into houses of worship unless there is an actual ongoing criminal or international terrorism threat. We will not use sources at this FBI to investigate and cull information just for the sake of culling information in houses of worship.
Has anybody been fired for this?
There have been terminations related to this and resignations.
Good. There need to be.
He did not specifically say how many people were terminated or what their roles were in drafting the memo. And flags are being flown at half-staff in Pennsylvania to honor 3 police officers killed in a shooting yesterday. York County authorities saying the officers are reportedly trying to serve a warrant when someone opened fire. While other reports indicated the gunman was killed by a self-inflicted gunshot wound, officials say he was actually killed by police. The FBI is assisting with that investigation. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Pennsylvania, a suspect is now in custody in connection to an incident considered to be an act of terror against the FBI. Authorities say Donald Henson rammed into a car in the FBI security gate at the Pittsburgh Bureau Wednesday morning. He then allegedly threw an American flag over the gate and attempted to flee the scene. No one was hurt in that incident. President Trump says a bond between the U.S. and the U.K. is unbreakable. He spoke at a state banquet hosted by the King of England at Windsor Castle in London yesterday.
Your Majesty, Melania and I are deeply grateful to you and Queen Camilla for your extraordinary graciousness. And to William and Kate, thank you so much. It's been so great being with you today.
King Charles says he cherishes the close ties between British and American people. Earlier in the day, the Trumps took part in a carriage procession through the Windsor estate with King Charles, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales. They also visited the tomb of the late Queen Elizabeth II and laid a wreath at St. George's Chapel. Well, we'll talk more about this in the program today, a little bit later on, including comments from Father Mitch Pacwa. Disney's ABC announcing it's taking Jimmy Kimmel's show off the air for the foreseeable future, following comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk. The announcement came after Nexstar Media Group, a major operator of ABC-affiliated stations, said in a statement it strongly objects to recent comments made by Kimmel concerning the killing of Kirk.
We at the FCC are going to enforce the public interest obligation. If there's broadcasters out there that don't like it, they can turn their license into the FCC. But that's our job. And again, we're making some progress now.
FCC Chair Brendan Carr speaking on Fox News about the incident Wednesday night. Carr said having a license from the Federal Communications Commission means a certain thing.
If you're going to have a license from the FCC, we expect you to broadly serve the public interest.
The Texas-based company said earlier it would replace the show with other programming in its 28 ABC affiliate markets. In his monologue Monday night, Kimmel raised the possibility that the alleged assassin of Kirk, Tyler Robinson, might have been a pro-Trump Republican. It's unclear when Kimmel's show will go back on the air or if it will at all. President Trump says he's designating anti-fascism movement Antifa as a terrorist organization. Trump making the announcement on Truth Social, calling the group a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster. He went on to say it will now be designated as a major terrorist organization. It's not known how Trump will make the designation, as the Antifa movement lacks centralized leadership. Trump said he would also push for investigation into those funding the group as well. And we're learning more about a very close call in the skies Tuesday morning involving a Spirit airline jet, a Scolding, and Air Force One. An air traffic controller in New York did not like how close the Boston-bound Spirit flight was flying to the plane that was carrying the president and First Lady Melania Trump to the UK.
Spirit 1300, turn 20 degrees right, vector traffic and defense. Pay attention, Spirit 1300, turn 20 degrees right. Spirit 1300, turn 20 degrees right now. Spirit Wings 1300, turn 20 degrees right immediately.
You could hear the air traffic controller complaining about having to relay instructions twice, repeatedly admonishing the pilot to pay attention. At one point, he told him, "Pay attention and get off your iPad." An investigation is underway. Police and first responders are on the scene of a military helicopter crash near Olympia, Washington. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office saying deputies responded to the crash site near Summit Lake just before midnight. The Sheriff's Office saying it was advised the military lost contact with the helicopter in the area. Local TV news reporting rescue efforts were being stalled by a fire at the scene earlier in the morning. It's not yet clear how many people were aboard the helicopter or whether anyone was hurt. Tammy Trujillo tells us America is undergoing a multi-step overhaul of the naturalization process.
The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service is out with a longer, revamped version of the test immigrants need to pass in order to become citizens. According to USCIS, the 2025 version of the Natural Civics Test will expand the number of potential questions from 100 to 128, and citizenship applicants will need to answer 12 questions correctly out of 20, rather than the old standard of 6 out of 10. The agency says more changes to the naturalization process will be announced soon. I'm Tammy Trujillo.
And some pretty big financial news breaking yesterday. The Federal Reserve is cutting interest rates for the first time in 9 months. Chair Jerome Powell making that announcement.
In support of our goals and in light of the shift in the balance of risks, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by 0.25 percentage point.
It comes as the president has called for the central bank to lower rates for months now. Stocks were mixed, though, after the announcement, with the Dow being up yesterday over 500 points, the S&P 500 a little changed, and the NASDAQ was down slightly. A majority of policymakers say they want 2 more rate cuts coming up sometime, they hope, this year. And finally, in our news segment on a Thursday morning at almost 13 minutes past the hour, Egyptian authorities are searching for an ancient gold bracelet that disappeared from a museum in Cairo. Egypt's Tourism and Antiquities Ministry says 3,000-year-old bracelet belonging to a pharaoh ruling Egypt from 993 to 984. Again, that's 993 to 984 BC. They say it was being restored in a lab at the Egyptian Museum when it went missing. Ministry says a photo of the bracelet has been sent to airports, seaports, and border crossings across Egypt to keep it from being smuggled out of the country. Father Mitch Pacwa with us for our Cultural Connections on a Thursday. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Catholic Connection. It's a Thursday, and that means we have our Cultural Connections segments with our very own Father Mitch Pacwa from EWTN Radio and Television. Father, it's been just over a week since the assassination of a very bright young conservative leader, Charlie Kirk, and it's really interesting. I think so much is being revealed in terms of darkness and light. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing so far, Father? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. You watch this there are a lot of contrasts going on. One, the immediate contrast we see is the number of people who are responding to Charlie Kirk's death with sometimes glee. There's no other word for it in some cases, and celebration. So much so that people who had responsible positions are losing them because their employers don't want to be part of this. And a case was a doctor who was expressing glee about this and lost his position because a nurse who overheard him, to whom he said it, said, if this is the guy in charge of life and death and he's celebrating death, is this a good idea to have him here? You see, one young man was posted singing a song with no rhyme, meter, nor good melody. I mean, it was a desperately pathetic melody. Singing in praise of this, and I don't want your salvation and all that. And it's showing a darkness that exists in people by having that glee. And then we think of the contrast with the way that folks on the progressive left dealt with the death of Mr. Floyd years ago, back in 2020, and they were the ones encouraging and doing a lot of violence and burning cities down, arms raised, and all this. Whereas, in contrast, the people who love Charlie Kirk or were at least admiring him, and there's a range of reactions, but people and people who were, good guy and all that, but not that big. All of a sudden, many of them are waking up. They're going to prayer vigils. They're setting up memorials, and they filled churches on Sunday across the board. Catholic, Protestant churches. I imagine a lot of people went to synagogue as well on Saturday. I just didn't see any mention of those statistics, but certainly Sunday worshipers were mentioned as having many people show up. And this is why I would, St. Ignatius Loyola in the spiritual exercises has a meditation called the Two Kingdoms. On the first, he imagines Satan as ruling over this horrible-looking Babylon, and then Christ ruling the new and heavenly Jerusalem. And as he describes the Babylon and the evil, I couldn't help but think of what's going on in some of the news, and then in the New Jerusalem, what's going on there. I mean, people, this clarifies, and this often happens throughout history, that when an event is really wicked, it is used like certain chemicals are used to bring out color. And you can see who really is. There are a lot of people that are, in between and stuff. All of a sudden, now you're no longer neutral. You realize you have to make a decision.
Right.
And some people truly decide for the darkness and evil, and others decide for God, for truth, and for light. Does that mean that they, and it's interesting to me too, when you do choose God and the kingdom of light, you still have to struggle with your own sins, and you work against it and all. Whereas those who choose the darkness easily don't have those regrets and guilt because they're justifying their own evil. And this is something that I think is becoming more and more clear.
Father, let me ask you a question about that, because what we're seeing also, and is this a product of also the darkness? I think it is, but I'd love your spiritual perspective with your knowledge on this topic. When you see these people, these extremists on the left, saying things that are not true, that are completely false, and they're actually in some ways delusional. They're projecting, they're blaming, they're calling that this shooter Robinson, saying that he was actually conservative, when all the evidence, even the parents and the investigators, are saying it's just the opposite. He went way, way, way rogue with leftist causes, including the transgender ideology. But those on the left screaming that no, he was a conservative. So this delusional thinking has got to be a problem and a product of the darkness.
Again, take a look at the teaching of Jesus our Lord. In John 8, verse 44, he defines Satan as a liar and the father of lies,
Mm-hmm.
and a murderer from the beginning. When we see such deception, and we see them deceiving in favor of murder,
Mm-hmm.
this is why we need to smell the sulfur. This is a sign of the evil going on. And the third thing, too, that defines Satan in Scripture, because Scripture doesn't define him often, but that verse has a two-part definition of who Satan is. And then in Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, the angel proclaims, after Satan is defeated by St. Michael and his angels, the angel proclaims, "Now is the accuser of our brethren fallen, he who accuses them day and night." And that kind of accusatory voice is satanic. So often I hear people say in the media, "I'm overcoming my Catholic guilt, my Jewish guilt, my Baptist guilt," whatever they come from. They blame the guilt, whereas I truly suspect that's not the case. They are justifying their own sins by saying the church made me guilty, when it's the evil one who is the accusatory voice, and they don't recognize him for what he is and who he is. Those three elements, lies, pro-murder, and constant accusation, characterize the evil side.
Yeah. Those are a great point, Father. When we come back, I want to talk about the connection between the culture of death and all of this that we're seeing, because I remember, Mother Teresa saying so many years ago at that famous prayer breakfast, talking about the fact that if you want peace, if you want things to change, stop killing your unborn. And it's just so clear, if you are okay with the overall culture of death, then this is not going to be an issue for you in terms of trying to be sensitive and realize what's going on here. More with Father Mitch Pacwa. Great insights, Father. I appreciate you. We'll be right back on a Thursday. Stay tuned. Continuing a dynamic conversation with Father Mitch Pacwa from EWTN Radio and TV regarding the fallout and developing story with Charlie Kirk's assassination just over a week ago. Father, we were talking during the break, and I know you mentioned this on your own programs earlier this week, about the connection between the culture of death here.
Yeah, there's no way that we can isolate the reality of people who advocate adamantly and with tremendous anger for being able to kill unborn children in their mother's wombs. Now, this is something that we have to pay close attention been advocating for that. And I'll never forget a lawyer in Chicago had come to Loyola University when I was a fairly new teacher. That would have been, I think, the spring semester of 85. And she had pointed out that in the first year after Roe versus Wade was pronounced, the murder rate for children 5 and under went up by 100%.
Wow.
It gave permission for people to say, well, I missed the deadline. I didn't get to kill my baby in the womb and it got born, but I'd like to kill it now. That's almost the logic that was going on. I don't know the exact logic of all those people who did that, but that's the very logical explanation of dealing with those who were born and killing them. And if you can kill the innocent in the womb, why not kill the innocent outside the womb like Charlie Kirk? There's no particular reason you shouldn't be able to, by the logic of the kingdom of darkness. And this is something that I think we also have to pay attention to. It's something else. A young woman, a friend of mine's daughter, had said, why is everything suddenly becoming so political? And she's someone who's had gone pretty far to the left and is now coming back. She wants to go to church again. She's making that kind of switch. And the Charlie Kirk death was part of her, forcing her to think about some of these things. And I said to her father, and I think this may well be the case, that the reason for everything becoming political is that when people like his daughter stop going to church, profess they don't believe in God or they can't prove God exists, then they still want something that is bigger than themselves in life. And they look to politics as that thing which is bigger than they are.
Something has to fill that void.
Yes, yes. Nature and supernature do not want a void. And that's why G.K. Chesterton had once said that when somebody loses their faith in God, they don't believe in nothing. They'll believe in anything, including politicians. And this becomes their greater significance and cause. The problem is, and we've seen this, I urge your audience to check out what I'm saying at a website called Hawaii.edu. So it's from the University of Hawaii. Hardly a conservative bastion, but it's Hawaii.edu/powerkills. And you can go there and see that through the history of all of Christianity, there have been about 2.5 million people killed in Christian persecutions of others and in Christian wars that were motivated by the faith, by Christian doctrine. So you've got that. But then it shows that before 1900, the number of people who died in secular war was 110 million versus 2.5 million for Christian wars. And then when you get to the 20th century, just the 20th century, where the wars were about nationalism that put the nation ahead of God, or about national socialism because that's what Nazi stands for. Nationalism, Nazi stands for National Socialist Workers Party. And then you add the communists, especially the communists. And you see that the number of people who died in the name of atheistic and nationalistic, socialistic and communist governments was 304 million. That's 150 times as many people as died in all the wars of Christianity. Now, this brings out that rejecting God and going for an ideology like communism, socialism, racism, etc. Matter of fact, when you think about it, the Civil War, the war between the states about, over slavery and such, was killed as many people as died in 250 years of the Crusades. It's about the same amount in 4 years. I mean, this is something that people reject Christ and his teaching. They become more violent. That's just a fact of history. You'll hear people say, well, religion's the biggest cause of war. No, it's not. That was something said by Thomas Hobbes in the 1650s when there was a civil war between Protestants in England, the Puritans and the Anglicans, and there was the 30 Years' War taking place in Europe where a Protestant was trying to become the Holy Roman Emperor. And that, when you take a look at that, and in that statement, in the light of longer range history than the immediate history of the 1650s, you see, no, this religion is not at even close to the biggest cause of war. Politics is.
Yeah.
And
well, nobody wants to look at reality or history, and that's a big problem too. And there's another question I wanted to ask you about a particular reporter from ABC News who and how the delusion continues in terms of siding with those who are the evildoers. This reporter was talking about the wonderful, sensitive and touching text between the shooter, the gunman, and his boyfriend, as opposed to talking about the situation with Charlie Kirk. It was just the most bizarre thing. He ended up apologizing, but I think that's another sign of the evil out there. Father, we got to go. Great discussion. Thank you so much. Always appreciate your insights, Father Mitch Pacwa, and our Cultural Connections. We'll be right back. Always great to catch up with the wonderful folks at Guadalupe Radio Network. We love their work. We love the fact that they carry our programming. And the two gentlemen on the phone with me this morning are both general managers in the Guadalupe Radio Network, Dave Palmer and Zach Allen. And I'm so excited when Toya Hall from GRN told me at the radio conference a few weeks ago all about the GRN Academy and how it is really catching on, even though it's still in its early stages. Guys, thank you both so much for joining me. Dave, I'm going to go back to you first, and because you and I have such a history together. Zach, I've known you, but you're more of a new person in my radio life. Dave and I go back, I don't want to say, Dave, how many years we know each other, but it's been a long time. So I remember when you first were talking about your interest in St. Thomas Aquinas and how you were starting to study to become a Thomist, and it's just amazing what you've accomplished in your time at Guadalupe Radio, the growth in your own education, additional education and faith, and what you've been doing with it. But take us back to the start of the GRN Academy, if you would.
Oh, yeah, sure. As many things are, again, good morning, Teresa. It's good to be with you, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about this. Yeah, as many things in the GRN, this came from, of course, the Holy Spirit through Toya Hall, and she, I think, was looking for a way that we could not only educate our listeners and continue to catechize, but also build community in a way that was interactive and live. And, of course, there's a lot of ways to learn that way. And so she said, why don't we, do something, form an academy where we can have specific classes. And she realized even within the GRN, not only me, but there are a number of people who really have expertise in particular areas, from apologetics to, Aristotle's ethics, one of our our brilliant guys down in San Antonio, Ray Lopez, and Steve Gleason is a great apologist. Of course, Debbie and Adam Bly, Debbie Georgiani, Angels and Demons. So that's kind of how it was born. And like everything, you just have a great idea and you put the people in place and say, let's do it. And you might make a few mistakes starting off, but overall it's been tremendously successful in our first session. We've got 2 weeks under our belt, and so far so good.
Well, Zach, tell us how this works. This is all online, correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right. It's 100% online. They're live virtual classes, so you do log in. You meet face-to-face through the screen, of course, with the teacher and with the other classmates. So it's really good for communication, really good for collaboration. All the teachers, of course, have their own style. Every classroom is varied on interest. You've got, of course, every topic is particular, depending on the course that's being taught, whether it's Dave's on the Summa, whether it's Dr. Ray's teaching about Aristotle, or Debbie and Adam with the Angels and Demons, or Steve Gleason's apologetics. So the people that signed up for the course signed up for a particular reason, but it's really unique, just like a classroom, and that the people in the class kind of set the environment. So it's a real class, and it's really nice to hear our teachers teaching and hear the students communicating, and it's been great for the first couple weeks.
That's exciting. We're talking with Dave Palmer and Zach Allen, both general managers of Guadalupe Radio Network stations within the Guadalupe Radio Network, about the new GRN Academy. Dave, where do we find it online?
It's our regular website is grnonline.com, and then if you just do a /academy, you'll find the landing page where people can register.
And Dave, let me go back to you, and then I'll have Zach jump in. But what do the students get? Do they get a certificate, or they're not earning a degree here technically, but they do get a certificate, the fact that they participated in this program, right?
Yes, that's right. We do have a certificate, and it's not, an accreditation or anything like that, but it's something that they can show to their pastor, or just, hang up on their wall or what have you, to say that they did complete the 7-week course. But those will be issued to all the students at the end of the session.
And Zach and Dave, I want your comment on this too. I can't help but think about God's timing in all of this, with everything that's been happening in our world, and especially with this last weekend, and Father Mitch alluded to this in the previous segments, about how so many people are really growing more and more interested in faith and looking up, with mass attendance increasing this weekend. And there was another story on Catholic News Agency about how young people are asking questions and looking for spiritual direction. The fact that you have this available where people can go deeper, I just see this really. Dave, you mentioned this earlier, but Zach, I'll go to you first. Work of the Holy Spirit.
I totally agree. I think, looking at our young people and people across our society in general, everybody is looking for answers. I mean, we look at all the things that have happened in the last week. There's really only one source that can make sense of all this, and that is God. And if people don't have him in their life, they're going to start to seek. And, of course, Catholic Radio, the Guadalupe Radio Network, is a great place for people to go. And these courses are meant really to offer that opportunity for some intentional learning if a particular topic sparks an interest. So people are listening to the radio, they're learning about the faith, they're learning about the culture through the eyes of the Catholic Church. Now, if they hear something that makes them want to go deeper, they can log in and join a particular class. And hopefully, like Dave was mentioning with the certificate, that certificate is meant to verify not just to someone else, but also to yourself that you've learned something and you're capable of sharing it. I think a lot of our listeners, they know so much about the faith from listening in, but they might not feel like they're capable of sharing because they don't see themselves in that light. But, signing up and intentionally taking the course for 7 weeks, getting to ask those questions directly to the instructor, and earning that certificate at the end, hopefully they will go back to their parish and then share that with a group within their parish, maybe the RCIA or OCIA group, maybe with the youth, if that's their, something that they're working with. Maybe they work in Catholic schools and they're able to bring this in to the students. So really lots of ways for this work of the Holy Spirit to really trickle down into multiple levels in our listeners' lives, we hope.
And Dave, we know from the research, and we talk about this a lot in Catholic Radio, that when people are involved in listening to Catholic Radio, there's a positive fallout into the parish and local church activities. And this is something that, as Zach just said, can really build on that, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Going back to the increase in people who are interested in the faith, one of the things that we saw, I don't know if you know this or not, Teresa, but I have taught the Summa Theologia to high school kids through another group called Homeschool Connections for the last 11 years. I know you and I have talked about that. And, I've had kids as young as 12 years old in my class learning the Summa. And I think, with me and all the teachers through GRN Academy, we make it approachable. We make it not so heavy and dense and typical, but if a 12-year-old can learn it and enjoy it and have fun learning it, we think everybody can. And as you say, there is right now this opportunity where there's this great interest in the faith and people converting to the faith. And a lot of them are very hungry, and they're looking for outlets like this to be able to increase their knowledge of the faith. And so that's why we're trying to give them that opportunity.
That's awesome. We're talking with Dave Palmer and Zach Allen from Guadalupe Radio Network and their new GRN Academy. Zach, how many people? I think Toya gave me a number at the radio conference, but I can't remember. Was it like 60 people have signed up already?
Yes. This first 7-week session, we're right around 60 students. And, of course, we'll kick off again in January with our next session. And so by then, we're hoping we'll be back with you in a couple weeks, so we'll have a couple of updates to share at that time.
Right.
To help get people in. But I would definitely encourage. These first 60 students are in. The classes are running. We're 2 weeks in. The instructors are teaching. People are asking questions. We're getting emails back and forth. It's really awesome because it's 7 50-minute sessions. It makes up the session. But, the email back and forth after, it really is going to build relationships, build a community, and build that connection with all the different people. So really excited to see what happens from there. I'm expecting to see students, bounce from one class to the next because they're going to want to learn more. As we add more courses, there'll be more and more things for them to jump into. So a lot of opportunities there. But, yeah, the website, grnonline.com/academy. Definitely encourage people now to go in there and see what we're offering this time and keep checking back in to see what's coming up.
Well, Zach, let me ask you, before I go back to Dave, in terms of the time frame, how do you decide when the classes are offered? Is that up to the instructors as to when they're available? How do you do that structure-wise?
Yeah, great question. So basically this time we have 4 classes that we're offering, and so we did base the class times, like let's say 6 or 7 p.m. or 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. We based that on the instructor's preference initially. But then also we did shift. Like, for instance, Dave can talk about this. We shifted the course backwards just to make it more available as we were getting feedback from potential students. So that is one of the things we're doing, too, is to see what time are our listeners most available to take the course.
Okay, so you're adjusting it. Okay, got it. Yeah.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dave, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah. We initially, my class was going to be 5 o'clock, and then we realized through feedback, people are like, that's when I'm either driving home or sitting down and having dinner with the family, and it just doesn't work. So we moved it to 7 o'clock, and most of the classes are on weekday evenings, 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Time. Ray Lopez's Aristotle class is on Saturday at 8 a.m. Central, so that's a little bit of a different time. Yeah, like Zach said, we're very open to trying to find out, what works for people. This is our experimental session, and it's gone really well. Taking advice and seeing what works best for the students.
All right, so here's a question. I know people are wondering, and Zach, I'll give you this, and Dave, you can weigh in if you like, but what's the cost? Is there a cost involved?
Yes, ma'am. So the cost is $25 to register for the session. So the session would include any of the courses. So for $25, you're registering to be able to enter any one or all of the courses that particular time. And then each course is $149. And so
that's pretty reasonable.
I think
that's
absolutely
really reasonable.
And coming from education and looking at the amount of face time you're getting with the teacher, the in-depth conversation, when the class sizes are not very large by intent, we want it to be a very good discussion. I think all that's going to lead to a very rich learner experience. And then also, it allows, because the courses, we intentionally don't offer them all at Monday at 7 p.m., right? You can take multiple. So we have one student taking 3 courses this time. We have a couple taking 2, and then, some people just wanted to take 1, so that's okay too. But, yeah, we do wanted to make the cost reasonable because we want people to be able to do it. But also, we want to be well done, and so we want the teachers to be able to be compensated for their time. We want to make sure that they're able to give a best effort, and they are doing that, and it's been really well done so far.
So, Dave, where do you see this going in terms of the different types of courses that could be offered to students in the future?
Well, it's going to expand. The 4 classes, I think, we're going to expand in January with the next session. I don't think I'm at liberty to give their names yet. We want to get final confirmation. But 2 very, very well-known people that we're in talks with, let's just say that. And I was very delighted at the Catholic Radio Conference a few weeks ago in not only your enthusiasm, Teresa, in talking about this, but a number of folks that we talked to, also very well-known personalities. I don't know where this is going to go, but I would not be surprised at all if there were some very familiar names that will be teaching classes beginning in January.
Well, I'd love to talk to you, and I know Toya and I talked about this, but there's so much that can be done on the media. I really believe that, the more Catholics know about how media operate, the better off they are. And so that's something I think that's on my heart. I've been praying about that. So hopefully we can go into further discussions. But I just think overall, this is really forward thinking on the part of Guadalupe Radio because of the outreach and the difference that you're making. And to just not just you do great, traditional radio, obviously Catholic radio, but then to branch out and to think, okay, what else can we do when you have so many good people that are working within your network, and to recognize those talents and to give them a voice elsewhere? I just want to commend you for it because you don't see that too often, and I think it's something that could be done with other entities as well. Guys, thank you so much. I look forward to the follow-up soon. Dave Palmer and Zach Allen, both general managers from the Guadalupe Radio Network. And Zach, give us a website one more time.
Yes, ma'am. It's grnonline.com/academy.
Okay, thanks, guys. We'll talk soon. And we'll be right back on a Thursday morning edition of Catholic Connection. Let you know what's coming up in the second hour. Stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in to the first hour of Catholic Connection. It is a Thursday, September 18, 2025, here on EWTN. Coming up on EWTN Radio Extra, 2 Cents are going to dive into the Federal Communications Commission and how the chair is speaking out about the problems he's seeing in the media and getting people back to basics of understanding broadcasting 101 in terms of license regulations and how we're supposed to be serving what the Communications Act of 1934 told us as in the public interest, need, and necessity. What does that mean? And also some of the points that Father Mitch made in his discussion with us this morning about the lack of reality on the other side. You have to understand that if you're not making the ratings, that's a basic fact of life. And so there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on here in terms of ABC probably coddling Jimmy Kimmel and telling him, oh, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, you're wonderful, you're great. And in the meantime, his show is tanking, but they like what he's saying because we know how woke Disney is and ABC. They both are. And reality hits because of the comments he makes, and then these groups within ABC who are carrying their program and say, you know what, this is not working. First of all, the ratings are really bad. We can't sell the time. And secondly, he's extremely offensive to half the country. So all those things play in, and it's about time these groups started standing up and demanding better programming from those who are providing it. So we'll talk about that in 2 Cents. And then I'm really interested to speak with Father Sebastian Walshe, who was on Father Mitch's program last night, talking about St. John the Baptist as a priest and prophet. He has a new book out about that. Stay tuned. More Catholic Connection coming your way on a Thursday on EWTN's Radio Extra channel.
Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
Happy Thursday, second hour of Catholic Connection coming to you right here on EWTN's Radio Extra channel, September 18, 2025. We have a great second hour for you as well in our 2 Cents segment, and the developments and the hits just keep on coming. I'm telling you, this story is never ending. There's so much fallout, and many of it good, thanks be to God, and it's hard to see when you're in the midst of sadness and your heart's breaking for Charlie Kirk and his family, but the Lord is allowing this horrible incident to bring about some pretty important changes, and we'll talk about some more of them coming up on our 2 Cents segment this morning, including Jimmy Kimmel being pulled off the air by ABC. This after 2 groups of TV operators within the ABC chain, they operate, I think, about 50 to 100 stations, said, basta, this is enough. After Kimmel went off last night and made Tuesday night and made some pretty bad comments about Charlie Kirk and the person responsible for his death. And his ratings were bad. Kimmel's ratings were very, very bad, even though he's trying to claim in a delusional way that it's the right-wing conspirators that shut down his show. No, your ratings were tanking. They were losing money. These TV groups are saying, enough already. We have to look at our bottom line and we have to care about our viewers. So he's out. Now, ABC says it's indefinite, so we'll see if he gets back on. Maybe there will be some self-reflection and a mea culpa. I highly doubt it, but we can pray and hope. But we'll talk about getting back to basics in broadcasting. The head of the FCC has come out and really reminding us what we're supposed to be doing in terms of earning the right to keep those broadcast licenses for radio and TV stations. Okay, so we'll talk about that little background as well. You know, this is something, this whole issue of serving the public need, interest, and necessity, which is in the Communications Act of 1934. I was drilled, this was grilled into me as a journalism and broadcasting student over 40 years ago. And then when I became a news director, I really found out how responsible you had to be, because we had to file all these different reports in terms of how much news content did we have, how much public affairs content did we have, how many editorials did we have on the air. All of that had to go into our licensing file. So if we came up for review, we could show them we were indeed serving the public interest. So we'll discuss coming up, and that'll be right after the news and the weather. Speaking of the weather, I forgot our second guest. Our second guest is a wonderful guest. He's coming in studio with us. He's Father Sebastian Walshe. He was on Father Mitch's program last night, and he's going to talk about his latest book, and this is also very timely, St. John the Baptist as Priest and Prophet. So we'll talk about that with Father in studio. He's down in Irondale, and that will be our program for the second hour of Catholic Connection on a Thursday morning. Let's look at the weather. According to the National Weather Service, heavy rain and flash flooding are possible. This across portions of the southwest through Friday, where flood watches are in effect. Strong to locally severe thunderstorms are possible today across portions of the plains, and a tropical wave is causing heavy rainfall in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, which could cause some real problems there in urban and small stream flooding and landslides even today. So we're talking about some damaging weather coming to that part of our world. It is a Thursday morning. We appreciate your listenership here in the second hour of Catholic Connection on EWTN Radio Extra. Let's get started with the news on a Thursday morning. At the conclusion of his weekly general audience, the Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, expressing his deepest sympathy for the people of Gaza, renewing his appeal for a ceasefire, the release of hostages, a diplomatic solution to the crisis, and full respect for international humanitarian law. Israeli forces launching a massive new military offensive against Gaza's largest population center, Gaza City, on Tuesday, ordering civilians to flee the city amid the most intense bombardment they have faced in almost 2 years of war. Hamas has said 350,000 people have fled the eastern part of the city for displacement centers in other parts of Gaza, while another 175,000 have fled the city altogether. Catholic News Agency is telling us in a report this morning that FBI Director Kash Patel is saying in a U.S. Senate hearing earlier this week that there have been terminations and resignations of employees related to a 2023 anti-Catholic memo produced by Richmond, Virginia's field office, and that the agency has made some policy adjustments. Patel making the comments earlier this week during a line of questioning from Republican Senator Josh Hawley, who requested an update on the administration's investigation into the memo asking about the FBI's efforts to combat anti-Catholic and anti-Christian violence and hate crimes.
Senator, we did dig in, and we are doing our investigation simultaneously with Congress. And just to put it in perspective, we provided 700 documents on the Richmond Catholic memo specifically to this committee, whereas my predecessor provided 19 pages. And not only that, but we looked into how the source recruitment structure at the FBI was conducted during this time. And we made adjustments and permanent fixes to ensure that sources are not put into houses of worship unless there is an actual ongoing criminal or international terrorism threat. We will not use sources at this FBI to investigate and cull information just for the sake of culling information in houses of worship.
Has anybody been fired for this?
There have been terminations related to this and resignations.
Good. There need to be.
He did not specify, though, how many people were actually terminated or what their roles were in drafting the memo. And flags are being flown at half staff in the state of Pennsylvania, honoring 3 officers killed in a shooting on Wednesday. York County authorities saying the officers were reportedly trying to serve a warrant when someone opened fire. Early reports indicate the gunman was killed by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Officials say he was actually killed by police. The FBI is now assisting with the investigation. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Pennsylvania, a suspect is also in custody in connection to an incident considered to be an act of terror now against the FBI. Authorities say Donald Henson rammed a car into the FBI security gate at the Pittsburgh Bureau yesterday morning. He then allegedly threw an American flag over the gate and attempted to flee the scene. No one was hurt. President Trump says a bond between the U.S. and the U.K. is unbreakable. He spoke at a state banquet hosted by the King of England at Windsor Castle in London Wednesday.
Your Majesty, Melania and I are deeply grateful to you and Queen Camilla for your extraordinary graciousness. And to William and Kate, thank you so much. It's been so great being with you today.
King Charles saying he cherishes the close ties between the British and American people. Earlier in the day, the Trumps took part in a carriage procession through the Windsor estate with King Charles, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales. And they also visited the tomb of the late Queen Elizabeth II and laid a wreath at St. George's Chapel. Well, we'll talk more about this in 2 cents coming up in just a few minutes, but Disney's ABC has announced it's taking Jimmy Kimmel's nighttime show, late night show, off the air for the, quote, foreseeable future, following comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk. The announcement came after Nexstar Media Group and Sinclair Media, major operators of ABC-affiliated stations, saying in statements that they strongly object to recent comments made by Kimmel concerning the killing of Kirk.
We at the FCC are going to enforce the public interest obligation. If there's broadcasters out there that don't like it, they can turn their license into the FCC. But that's our job. And again, we're making some progress now.
FCC Chair Brendan Carr speaking on Fox News last night about the incident Wednesday night. Carr saying having a license from the FCC means a certain thing.
If you're going to have a license from the FCC, we expect you to broadly serve the public interest.
The company is saying that they would replace the show with other programming in their affiliated markets. In his monologue on Monday night, Kimmel raising the possibility the alleged assassin of Kirk, Tyler Robinson, might have actually been a pro-Trump Republican. It's unclear when Kimmel's show will go back on the air or if it will return at all. President Trump saying he's designated the movement Antifa as a terrorist organization. He made the announcement on Truth Social calling the group a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster. He went on to say it will now be designated as a major terrorist group. It's not known how he will make that designation as the movement lacks centralized leadership. But Trump said he would also push for investigations into those funding Antifa as well. And we're learning more about a close call in the skies on Tuesday morning involving a Spirit airline jet, a Scolding, and Air Force One. An air traffic controller in New York did not like how close the Boston-bound Spirit flight was flying to the plane that was carrying the President and the First Lady to the UK.
Spirit 1300, turn 20 degrees right, vector traffic and descent. Pay attention, Spirit 1300, turn 20 degrees right. Spirit 1300, turn 20 degrees right now. Spirit wings 1300, turn 20 degrees right immediately.
You could hear the air traffic controller complaining about having to relay instructions more than once and repeatedly admonishing the pilot to pay attention. At one point, he told him, pay attention and get off your iPad. An investigation is underway. Police and first responders on the scene of a military helicopter crash near Olympia, Washington. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office saying deputies responded to that crash site near Summit Lake just before midnight. The Sheriff's Office saying it was advised the military lost contact with the helicopter in the area. Reports say that rescue efforts are being stalled by a fire at the scene. It's not yet clear how many people were on board the helicopter or whether anyone was hurt or killed. And Tammy Trujillo tells us America undergoing a multi-step overhaul. overhaul of the naturalization process.
The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service is out with a longer, revamped version of the test immigrants need to pass in order to become citizens. According to USCIS, the 2025 version of the Natural Civics Test will expand the number of potential questions from 100 to 128, and citizenship applicants will need to answer 12 questions correctly out of 20, rather than the old standard of 6 out of 10. The agency says more changes to the naturalization process will be announced soon. I'm Tammy Trujillo.
And Mark Mayfield tells us there's an update in immigration. This story, an immigration judge is ordering the deportation now of Mahmoud Khalil to Algeria or even Syria.
Court documents show the judge alleged in a hearing last Friday the former Columbia University grad student omitted information from his green card application. Khalil had been detained by the Trump administration as part of a crackdown on those criticizing Israel's war in Gaza. He was released in June. Khalil's lawyers say they have 30 days from last Friday's ruling to appeal. I'm Mark Mayfield.
And the Fed, the Federal Reserve, cutting interest rates for the first time in 9 months. Chair Jerome Powell making that announcement.
In support of our goals and in light of the shift in the balance of risks, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by a 0.25 percentage point.
It comes as President Trump has called for the central bank to lower those rates for months now. Stocks were mixed, though, after the announcement, with the Dow yesterday being up over 500 points, and the S&P 500 a little bit changed, but not much, and the NASDAQ was down slightly. A majority of policymakers saying they want 2 more rate cuts, though, this year. And Phil Farrar tells us there was chaos last night at San Diego's International Airport after a ground stop tied up flights from around the country.
This happened shortly after 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. A private aircraft attempting to take off had difficulty with its landing gear. Airport officials say that diverted all inbound and halted all outbound flights from taking off. Many delays. 2 hours later, that runway reopening, no one was injured. I'm Phil Farrar.
And Egyptian authorities are searching for an ancient gold bracelet that disappeared from a museum in Cairo. Egypt's Tourism and Antiquities Ministry saying the 3,000-year-old bracelet belonged to a pharaoh ruling Egypt from 993 to 984 BC. They say it was being restored in a laboratory at the Egyptian Museum when it went missing recently. The ministry says a photo of that bracelet has been since sent to airports, seaports, and border crossings as well across Egypt to keep it from being smuggled out of the country. Fascinating. It is a Thursday morning. We appreciate you here at EWTN, our second hour of the program, brought to you by the network on EWTN's Radio Extra channel. Coming up in 2 cents, we are going to take a look at the latest development in media regarding the Charlie Kirk shooting, what's happened. Taking a look at what the Federal Communications Commission says about everything that's going on and how we need to get back to basics. And then Father Sebastian Walshe joins us in studio with a new book, relatively new book, all about St. John the Baptist, priest and prophet. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Fifteen minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Catholic Connection, EWTN's Radio Extra. It's our 2 cents segment. Big story that's been breaking since yesterday regarding another talk show host being removed from his or her position. This is a late night talk show host. Of course, we remember a while back when Stephen Colbert was removed, even though technically he's still on the air. He's allowed to, I guess, fulfill his contract obligations and stay on the air a few more months and still get paid. But the show is done. Stephen Colbert's show is done on CBS. And now, at least for now, indefinitely, so is Jimmy Kimmel. So here's the summary of the Jimmy Kimmel story and what happened. And there's a couple of different stories out there. One reporting that he was seen leaving the studio after his show was pulled indefinitely over a comment. He was seen leaving the studio of ABC after they indefinitely pulled his show off the air over his remarks about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Nexstar Media Group, which owns hundreds of television stations, announced earlier would preempt Kimmel's show on its ABC affiliate starting Wednesday night for the foreseeable future, and will replace it with other programming over his comments about alleged Charlie Kirk assassin Tyler Robinson. On Monday, Kimmel accused conservatives of reaching new lows in trying to pin a left-wing ideology on 22-year-old suspect Tyler Robinson, even though prosecutors, not just prosecutors, but his family members, reaffirmed those ties in Tuesday's indictments. He said, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it." Okay, remember what Father Mitch was saying in the first part of the program this morning in our Cultural Connections with Father Mitch Pacwa that we do every Thursday here on Catholic Connection? Remember how he was saying that when you are seeing the difference between good and evil, Satan is the author of lies. And when people are blinded, they can't see the truth. They can't see the forest for the trees. And so where is Kimmel getting any of this information? Trying to say that the 22-year-old suspect, Tyler Robinson, is even remotely conservative. His family members, both his mother and father and other family members, have testified, at least in terms of being interviewed by police. They haven't actually been in court yet, but in terms of the research that the law enforcement people behind the arrest of him have done, have been very clear in saying that their son lost his way and that he had many arguments with his father of late because they were very different ideologically. He called Charlie Kirk a hater, Tyler Robinson, and he lived with a man who identified as a woman. And so how is this that Kimmel can just come up with something like this and lie and say it's MAGA trying to blame it on the left, when police and family and those who knew the suspect, who's behind bars now, are saying just the opposite? So again, let's not let facts get in the way of a good story or of reality. And this is the problem. And this is why his ratings were so bad. The same thing with Colbert. They went from maybe early on and being funny, somewhat, I never liked either of them, but then all of a sudden turning their late night shows into leftist propaganda. That's all they used it for. And then they're shocked that the ratings go down and that they get taken off the air. You have a responsibility, okay, when you're on a secular station that is licensed to reach more than just one particular group. Now, in our case, let's be clear, we are Catholic Radio. We make no bones about it. We are very clear where we stand, and we make a stand saying that we are here to educate and uphold the faith. So you turn on EWTN and one of our affiliates, you know we're Catholic Radio. We identify it all the time. But it's different with these secular outlets that are carried across the country on other secular stations. All of us have a responsibility, regardless of the format, whether it be news talk, whether it be music, whether it be religious programming. If you have a licensed station from the Federal Communications Commission, you have a responsibility to fulfill the requirements to hold your license. So let me just give you a little background. This is something that you learn so quickly if you really want to study journalism and broadcasting. I have a degree in journalism with a minor in broadcast and cinematic arts. And these are the things that we learned in terms of the basics. The concept of public interest, convenience, and necessity is a foundational principle guiding the FCC's regulation of broadcasting and telecommunications, requiring licensees to serve the needs of their local communities. The phrase public interest, convenience, and necessity originates from the Communications Act of 1934, which established the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission. The principle mandates that broadcast licensees operate in a manner that serves the public's needs and interests. And this is in exchange for the privilege of using public airwaves. Broadcasters are required to provide programming that addresses local community issues and needs. So you can see right there, programming that addresses local community issues and needs. You can't have a show only serving one part of the community. And in the case of Jimmy Kimmel and Colbert, only serving the left. Okay? The FCC created to regulate the airwaves and ensure that broadcasters act as public fiduciaries, meaning they must manage their stations as if they were owned by the public, prioritizing community service over profit. There's a concept. Now, unfortunately, things have changed. They've loosened a lot of the regulations. But if you listen to, and we have a clip here we're going to play for about a minute, of the head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, who was on a number of programs last night, including Fox News. He says we have to get back to the basics of these broadcasters who get these licenses to make sure they're serving more than one particular group of people. Take a listen.
Yeah, broadcasters are different than any other form of communication, including here. We're on cable right now. Fox News doesn't have an FCC license. CNN doesn't. But ABC, CBS, NBC, those broadcast stations do. And with that license comes a unique obligation to operate in the public interest. And over the years, the FCC walked away from enforcing that public interest obligation. I don't think we're better off as a country for it. But look, President Trump ran directly at these legacy broadcast outlets, and he exposed them to these market forces. And a lot of these affiliate groups said, to your point, we're tired of carrying this stuff. Late night shows, something's gone seriously awry there. They went from going for applause, from laugh lines to applause lines. They went from being court jesters that would make fun of everybody in power to being court clerics and enforcing a very narrow political ideology. We at the FCC are going to enforce the public interest obligation. If there's broadcasters out there that don't like it, they can turn their license in to the FCC. But that's our job. And again, we're making some progress now.
That's about time. All right, so over the decades, and I've seen this as well, and I mentioned earlier in the program that I was a news director before I left the secular media. That was my last job, and I had to make sure I was filing a lot of paperwork. How much news content did we have? How much public affairs comment did we have? How much PSAs, public service announcements, were we doing? All that was a part of making sure your license could get renewed. So the standards have been weakened, but the requirements, okay, even though they're a little bit weaker in terms of how much of a non-entertainment content you have to have, broadcasters must maintain an issues programs list that documents how they serve the public interests, okay? So in other words, they have to show that they're still trying to make a difference and to serve all of their community, not one particular group. It has gotten so bad, it has gone so far off the rails in terms of networks and local stations and newspapers, which are covered under a whole different category and really don't have an FCC monitoring them. But it's just gotten so bad overall in the secular media. Enough is enough. Things have got to change. And not just to cover things in which we're interested, conservative issues and pro-life, but to serve, if you are a secular station, to serve the community, not just the extremists on the left, which is what Colbert did and which is what Kimmel did. And you know what? Their ratings were suffering for it. It's not as if some conservative, as if they want to say this, they both are saying this because there's no self-reflection here, no looking in the mirror and saying, gee, maybe I didn't really approach content the way I should have. It's all about, oh, they did this to me. These right-wing extremists. No, your ratings tanked. You weren't fulfilling your obligation as a broadcaster. Put on your big boy pants, have some self-reflection, and do a better job when you're given a license. Be right back. We are certainly keeping Father Sebastian Walshe very, very busy, a wonderful Dominican priest. He's in studio with us this morning, and he was on Father Mitch's program last night talking about his latest book on St. John the Baptist. And Father, you told me you're taping 5 episodes with the lovely Janet Williams coming up on Women of Grace, correct?
That's correct.
Wow. So now you're on my program. You poor thing. Did you get any sleep at all? Did you get any rest?
Oh, yeah. I'm fine.
Okay,
They've
good.
been treating me very well here at
I know.
EWTN.
They're wonderful. It's a wonderful place to be. I love our people in our studios in Irondale. All right. So I'm thinking, we were talking during the break just how timely. I mean, Scripture is always timely. It's always God's word, so it's living. But the story of John the Baptist, I think, very apropos for what's going on in our world right now, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, John the Baptist was someone who was killed because he wouldn't refuse to speak the truth. And in particular, he was speaking about the sanctity of marriage and family to those in power, to Herod, Herodias, and so forth.
What prompted you to do this in-depth look at St. John the Baptist?
So I had written a previous book during the year of St. Joseph on St. Joseph, and Tan Books was kind enough to publish that. And the owner of Tan Books, Connor Gallagher, liked that book so much, he said, can you write something on St. John the Baptist? He had a great devotion to St. John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I prayed about it, and one thing that came to mind was that our order, I'm actually a Norbertine.
You're a Norbertine. I thought you were a Dominican. Okay.
I know,
All
we
right.
dress alike, it's true.
I know. I look at your picture, and I thought for sure you were a Dominican. Anyway.
In our order, we have a very strong devotion to St. John the Baptist, and the reason was because St. John the Baptist was very much in line with what St. Norbert was trying to do. St. Norbert lived at a time when there was a lot of corruption in the priesthood. St. John the Baptist lived at a time when there was a lot of corruption in the Levitical priesthood. Both of them went out in the wilderness and just started, acting the way priests should act, and a voice crying out in the wilderness. And just like St. John the Baptist's life was threatened for preaching the truth, the same happened to St. Norbert. And I'm reminded of a quote that St. Thomas Aquinas said on one occasion. He said, "If a man speaks the truth during the whole course of his life the way he ought to, he will almost certainly find himself in danger of death." Isn't that fascinating?
Wow.
So that's where we are, and it's things in some ways, some things never change. But that was the impetus, and I was very happy then. The very first chapel in the history of our order was dedicated to St. John the Baptist in a little tiny valley called Prémontré in northeastern France. And so St. John the Baptist has always been near and dear to the heart of Norbertines. And so I wrote the book largely for that motivation.
Now, there's a quote in the prologue where it says, "We cannot understand Jesus Christ fully without understanding John the Baptist." Why do you say that?
So I'll give some pieces of scriptural evidence for that. First of all, in John's prologue, he says that John came that all might believe through him. Mm-hmm. That's a striking statement. Everyone, all might believe through him. And then later on, when it's time to replace Judas Iscariot, Peter lays down as a criterion that this is someone who has to have known Jesus from the baptism of John, as if somehow you didn't really know Jesus well or perfectly unless you had known John and his baptism. Isn't that fascinating? Mm. So my contention is that just as the Old Testament is necessary for understanding perfectly and clearly what's happening in the New Testament, so also the life, the preaching, the sacramental ministry of John, I guess a proto or pre-sacramental ministry, you might say, is necessary for understanding perfectly the life and the sacraments of the new church in Jesus Christ.
Do we have enough John the Baptist out there today, especially when it comes to the priesthood and the diaconate, do you think, Father?
Sadly, no. I don't think we do. I think, in fact, once a month at my parish, I help out at a parish every Sunday, Our Lady of Fatima down in San Clemente. And I have a monthly question and answer. It's an opportunity to speak to the faithful about their particular questions, because from a homily perspective, you almost never get the opportunity to respond to people's legitimate needs. So I do that, and a lot of parishioners show up for that. And one of the primary questions they ask me is, how come more priests aren't preaching about the moral problems of our time? Priests seem to be notoriously silent about moral issues, especially those surrounding marriage and family. It's really easy to talk about political issues and, feed the poor. Who disagrees with feeding the poor? This is not something, and it's true that people need to commit, their resources to that. That's one thing, but it's not a challenging message. Everyone admits that you should feed the poor. But as soon as you start speaking against abortion, or against, the sexual, unnatural sexual behavior and these other things that happen in our society regularly, now suddenly the handcuffs are on, and priests refuse to address those questions anymore, So in any case, I do think that that many times priests are afraid that their collections will be affected. They're afraid what their bishop might say. They're afraid they'll be disapproved. I don't know the reasons or motivations. Mm-hmm. But that's a complaint that the faithful have very often, that they feel that they've not been nourished.
Do you think we've reached a tipping point, though, with what happened recently with Charlie Kirk, with so many people packing the churches? I know we saw this after 9/11 in certain times in our history where it's been really rough going. But there seems to be, and maybe I'm wrong, or maybe just too hopeful, but there seems to me, at least in the Christian communities, even people who believe have been motivated even further. More people are going back to church, at least for now, And
Yes.
there seems to be a great interest in this young man, Charlie Kirk, his movement, and what he was trying to do in terms of speaking the truth in love.
It's hard to say. I mean, history will judge us going back.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you're very close to it, it's so dramatic and so tragic that you tend to think, wow, this, how could this not be a tipping point? And it may well be. It may end up being that where people start soul searching and saying, why is it that a man who was very friendly and who was willing to engage in serious back and forth and listen to people, why is that guy being shot? If that guy's being shot, almost all of us could be shot because we all think that's, almost everyone thinks that's the right way to go about things. And so, you hope that will cause a kind of an examination of conscience, at least in our country and throughout our culture. It'll probably result in a lot more people taking interest in the sort of things that Charlie Kirk said. I'm sure there's Google searches are up and things like that, and people are actually trying to see what he stood for, what he said. I did not know him personally, and I only had seen a few videos of his over the years, but he was an intelligent man who was willing to, engage in constructive back and forth with people and to, say, well, how do we know that this is true? His motto was, prove me wrong, And he let people talk. It was great. And so I hope that will cause some collective soul searching, some, examination of conscience, as we would say in the Catholic world, about, how we've really approached those questions.
And it's so interesting. You bring out the fact that he debated people, but he also invited those with whom he disagreed to the front of the line on the college campuses. So they lost a platform. He gave them a platform to argue their point.
Yes, I think that's true. And, here once again, why would anyone want to silence someone who was willing to let the other person talk?
Yeah. More with Father Sebastian Walshe on his beautiful book, St. John the Baptist, Priest, Prophet, and Martyr, and how it relates to our times today. He's in studio with us this morning. We'll be right back. Appreciate the great work and ministry of our guest, Father Sebastian Walshe, originally from Pasadena, in Obertine, Canada, the Abbey of St. Michael and Diocese of Orange, where he's a professor of philosophy for the seminary program. And he's been on Catholic Answers Live. He was on Father Mitch last night, and he's going to be taping 5 shows with our beautiful sister, Jeanette Williams, and he's in studio with us this morning. And he has a beautiful book, his most recent book, which came out, Father, was published a few months ago, though, right? In January, I believe, about John the Baptist?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the situation in which we find ourselves, continuing that conversation we had prior to the break. And we were talking during the break about the fact that, St. John the Baptist had been preaching and teaching for a while, and he gets arrested, and it was that topic, the whole issue of marriage, what was happening with Herodias and the daughter and all of that. I think most people are familiar with these stories from Scripture, and that's what cost him his life.
Yes, so obviously, what was happening was, John the Baptist was preaching repentance for all sinners, okay? Mm-hmm. And included in those who were sinners was Herod and his wife, okay? Herodias, or, putative wife anyway. Those who know the Scriptures remember that Herodias had been married to Philip, that was Herod's brother. And in fact, Josephus tells us that Herodias was also their niece. It was their brother's daughter. They are the brother's daughter, half-brother's daughter. So it gets really ugly there, And so St. John the Baptist, of course, always willing to defend the sanctity of marriage and family, and seeing how incest really destroys family relationships, and seeing that this is this big public witness of, incest is okay, John the Baptist started preaching against Herod and Herodias. And for that, he was arrested. And Herod, interestingly enough, his conscience, though it bothered him, he actually enjoyed listening to John, and he wasn't willing to put him to death. He actually had something in him that was willing to recognize, okay, there's something good here. But then Herod's own passions overcome him. His daughter, his stepdaughter, the daughter of Herodias, so also his niece again, does this beautiful dance, and he's overwhelmed, and he says, I'll give you half my kingdom. And read between the lines there. I think that's basically a marriage proposal. But the daughter's too young to figure it out. She goes to her mother, and the mother, who's very angry at John the Baptist for preaching against her, second marriage here, asks for the head of John the Baptist. So that's why John the Baptist is killed. And kind of, just to bring the connection back to Charlie Kirk, it's interesting. He was hit in the neck. Right? John the Baptist had, his head cut off there. Well, I often like to say that those who stand to gain the most from the church's teaching, especially on marriage and family, are often those who are most vocally opposed to it. And think of this case of Herodias. She was the one who stood to gain the most from the teaching about marriage and family. Her daughter was about to be made, into Herod's new wife, and she was going to get jettisoned. Because what? Because of Herod's lust and his willingness to commit incest again, right? And in the same way, who stands to gain the most from the church's teaching about abortion, the sanctity of life? Women who are having difficult pregnancies. Who stands to gain the most from the church's teaching about, the fact that only a man and woman can marry? People who have same-sex attraction, and so forth. They're actually the ones that stand to gain the most from the church's teaching, because their lives are kind of heading for that inevitable train wreck, that moral train wreck. And people can say from the outside, oh yeah, we have perfectly happy lives, da-da-da-da-da. You can't fool me, I'm a priest. Right. How many times have I heard confessions of women where 40 years ago they had an abortion, they still can't overcome the guilt
and deal with it.
And people who live, same-sex, relationship lives, and their lives are train wrecks, and they just can't get, through anything. And on the other hand, I've had many people who come to me with same-sex attraction or women with difficult pregnancies, and I help them get past it and make the sacrificial choice, and they have lives of peace and joy, and they're so glad they made those sacrifices, and the result is joy and peace.
Right.
So I know, no one's going to fool me about what's really happening behind the scenes in these things, and the church needs to heed John the Baptist's message today.
Well, if you look, for example, the situation with Charlie Kirk's murder, the gunman, Tyler Robinson, he's in a relationship with a man who identifies as a woman, and apparently, I guess, I don't know where you can't change your sex, obviously, but I don't know where he was in the so-called transitioning process. There were pictures of this man identifying as a woman. Now we're seeing those circulating, but he was in this relationship living with this person. And so, again, as you said, right there, totally against church teaching. And what was Charlie Kirk preaching at the time? And he really had been hitting these points home about family and marriage. That was, and we're talking to Raymond Royal last week, and Raymond and I were talking about the fact that more than politics or Republican versus Democrat or left versus right, he was talking about the sanctity of marriage.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that are natural. Male, female, person, marriage, family. All those things are natural, and they're the result of natural inclinations in the human person that are pre-conscious. They're deeper than any, emotional desire. And when our emotional desires run contrary to our natural inclinations, like a woman has anorexia, she doesn't want to eat. Well, the solution isn't to just stop eating. The solution is to change our emotions, or to try and address our emotions so that we can fulfill our natural inclinations. And the totalitarian state wants to do the opposite. The totalitarian state wants to make marriage, family, male, female, person, make all those things into things that the state defines and creates. And that, of course, destroys the foundation of human civilization and the possibility of human happiness and flourishing, not just for the individuals that undergo that, but for the whole society, because, as I point out, when you redefine marriage and family, you've changed everyone's family in that society. Right. It's not just a private thing.
Right. Talking with Father Sebastian Walshe about his latest book, St. John the Baptist, Priest, Prophet, and Martyr. Another point, Father, is his lack of, and the same, I guess, with Herod and Herodias and the whole scene from the Gospels, is this lack of reality, the denial of reality, of what's wrong and what's right. And we see this all the time. And to the point where, just blatant lying. For example, Jimmy Kimmel, who was just let go, he's out there saying that this gunman was really a Republican. So there's this element of you can't see the truth. You can't speak honestly because you're so blinded. All the evidence, regardless of where people stand on Charlie Kirk or Republican, Democrat, or whatever, all the evidence, the law enforcement officials, family members, friends, all said that Tyler Robinson had gone way, way, way left of center. He was arguing with his father ideologically. He had fights with his mother. He was living in this relationship with this man identifying as a woman. And yet you have someone who has a national talk show who goes on the air and just blatantly lies. To me, that's a sign of what happens when you are so hard-hearted toward God.
Yeah, I don't know, why people would do something like that. And in his case, you wonder what news sources he was willing to turn on. You know what I mean? I think that, when you're only willing to listen to one news source or one source of information.
Yeah, but even the MSNBCs did run the press conference where law enforcement was saying he leaned to the left big time. So that's what I'm wondering, like the total denial of reality.
Yeah, I don't know why anyone would do that. I don't know the answer to that. So Charlie, Jimmy Kimmel, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he'll have to explain why he would have said such things. But, all of us are going to have to explain before God, the judgment seat of God, why we do what we do. And anyway, one thing I've come to accept serenely is that justice will never be done in this life. Mm-hmm. And thanks be to God, there's a just judge who, rectifies every injustice in the life to come.
Yeah. In terms of the messages that you want people to glean mostly from your book, what would they be about St. John the Baptist, do you think, Father?
Well, a few things. First of all, the importance of knowing the preaching, the mission of St. John the Baptist as a way of more deeply understanding Christ. That'd be the first thing that I think my book would be helpful for. A second thing is the role in particular of St. John the Baptist's life with regard to the priesthood, and in particular the modern priesthood. My order was founded for the purpose of reforming the clerical life, the priesthood in the church. And St. John the Baptist is a wonderful example of how to reform the priesthood. And then finally, St. John the Baptist's willingness to give his life for the sanctity of marriage and family, the right relationships. St. John the Baptist, from the time he was an infant in the womb, experienced the presence of Christ and rejoiced in Christ. So he had a great love, a deep abiding love, even for every infant in the womb and every child that would come into the world. He knew that they had the right to be born into a loving family with their own father and mother, and in right relationships with one another. And so those are all things that I think St. John the Baptist still has to teach us today.
I think it's such a pro-life message too, with St. John the Baptist and Jesus when they meet, at the visitation. I love that, you know. And St. Elizabeth, what is it that the mother of my Lord should come to me, the moment of your voice, the child in my womb leaped with joy. I love that.
Right. No, that's a beautiful thing. Even unborn children, our Lord became an unborn child, and even unborn children can experience the presence of God.
Yeah. How do you think we're doing in terms of reforming the priesthood? How far have we come? How far do we have to go? I know it's a loaded question as we wrap up. But you have 2 minutes. You could solve that problem in 2 minutes.
I'll be honest with you. I think that to this point, the reforms have been radically insufficient because they have focused on externals almost entirely. For example,
good point.
We can't have priests together and alone with young people, minors, right? That's an external, right? They still haven't addressed, for example, the problem of rampant, consensual adult, infidelity against their vows of priests, particularly when there's same-sex attraction involved there. That has not been addressed at all. There's no canonical penalty for that. That's very serious. There used to be a very strict canonical penalty for not only fornication, but especially for, same-sex interaction between adults, when a priest was involved. That hasn't been addressed. And then just the larger question, priestly formation. Our abbey, since 1961, We had a summer camp and also a boarding school for boys there. So we were basically caring for boys from the age of 7 all the way to 18 at our abbey since 1961. And our abbot, our first abbot, our founding abbot, Abbot Parker, used to say, don't touch the boys. If they're crying, you can put your arm on their shoulder, sort of thing. But he was very clear about the kind of discipline you had to have and the accountability we had to have with one another. And we haven't had in all those years even a case of an accusation, much less an abuse case among our priests in the community, priests and seminarians. That's an astounding thing, and it shows you that the problem is priestly formation. We had the most access, so to speak, to abuse and never had it because we were formed the way priests should be formed. So that part still has not been addressed as far as I can tell in the current ecclesiastical situation.
I have a lot of work to do. Father, thank you so much for taking so much time with all of us here at EWTN, Father Mitch Pacwa, myself, and of course, Johnette Williams, and look forward to your future programs. Where do we get the book? How do we find it?
Well, you can get it from tanbooks.com, and you can also just go on Amazon and find it there. It's St. John the Baptist, Priest, Prophet, and Martyr.
And I believe it's on our EWTN catalog website as well. Thanks, Father. God bless you. We'll be right
God bless you too.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the second hour of Catholic Connection on EWTN's Radio Extra. Thursday, September 18th, the Feast of St. Cupertino from Naples. You can check it out on my website, travelitalyexpert.com, and really enjoyed that conversation with Father Sebastian Walshe. So make sure you stay tuned to Women of Grace. We're taping 5 episodes today with Jeanette. And, of course, womenofgrace.com and EWTN.com will let you know where those programs will be seen. And you can already, I believe, see the show that Father Sebastian did last night on his John the Baptist book with Father Mitch Pacwa. Coming up tomorrow, looking forward to sharing all kinds of great information about what's coming up in programming with our very own Doug Keck, President Emeritus. Will be giving us the inside word, and then we're also going to be talking about a book, a beautiful book. We'll be talking about holiness. It'll be amazing. We will have a good time with that, I'm sure, to learn more about how we can be holy, the shock of holiness. And then we're going to be talking with Dr. Pat Castle, and the topic is Padre Pio, patron saint of life runners. And oh my goodness, his feast day, by the way, is coming up on the 23rd. How in the world did Padre Pio become the patron of life runners? Inquiring minds want to know, and we'll find out tomorrow. So again, it's going to be a great program tomorrow as well. 2 hours, EWTN Radio and EWTN Radio Extra. And pick up a copy of Father's book all about St. John the Baptist, who can help us really understand our Lord, our faith, and what's going on in our world right now. Have a great Thursday. We'll talk to you on a Friday. Ciao, ciao. On domani.